Hey there, I'm Sully, and welcome to the Gun Club. Joining us tonight, we've got two instructors, so quite a wealth of firearm expertise and knowledge. We have Scott McGaw and Bill Kennedy, both local instructors here to me in the upstate of South Carolina. Gentlemen, welcome aboard.
Thank you very much.
Oh, good to have you all. I know, Bill, you've been here before, and you've taught with Scott before, apparently, and again, very laid back. Although we do have a couple of discussions I think we may get into tonight as far as, I don't know. We talked about the Alec Baldwin case a little bit in my tweet, and, or not tweet, but my YouTube short that apparently lit the world on fire. And, I'm sorry, I'll still say what I said. Any one of three rules could have saved that woman's life. And these are rules that I'm sure every first-time firearm owner, we preach it. We preach it. They're tools, but they are dangerous if used inappropriately, incorrectly, carelessly, recklessly, etc. So,
Absolutely. The sad thing is that's exactly it. If just one thing was followed, she would still be alive.
mm-hmm.
We can look at it all the time. When Scott and I are teaching classes. And by the way, it hasn't been just a little bit. It's been like 12 years. I don't know. It's been a long time.
I think more than that, actually, but close enough.
Yeah, I just stopped keeping track. But the very first thing we drill into people, the four cardinal rules of firearm safety, and if those would have been followed, she'd still be alive.
And really, in truth, any one of them. And again, part of I think my frustration is not only the fact that it happened, but it seemed to me, especially having watched the interview with George Stephanopoulos on ABC, he doesn't seem to accept any responsibility for it. At least admit you messed up.
Right.
Own, we're all instructors. We've all worked in public safety. We've all educated and worked with and coached and mentored thousands of people. Own your screw up. If you own it, I can do anything.
Yeah, accidents happen. Just admit it.
Yes. And,
it's kind of like an example I had when I was a police sergeant, and one of my guys called me. It was about 10 minutes, 15 minutes before shift started. He's like, Sarge, I got a problem. Like, what? That doesn't sound good. And he said, yeah, I had a negligent discharge. And he said, I wanted to call you. What do I do? I said, you stay right there. I'll be there. Is anyone hurt? No. Okay. And you know what? He told me everything. He admitted to it. We made sure there was nobody harmed. It was stupid, and he learned from it, but it was an accident. And, luckily it was a nothing burger. But if somebody had been on the other side of that wall, then it becomes something much more serious. In Alec Baldwin's case, it wasn't an accident. It was outright ridiculous. It was criminal. And I'm glad it's going that way.
And, I think it was interesting reading the comments that the YouTube short got. And, there's a lot of people, but it was an accident. And I don't think any one of us think he deliberately woke up that morning and said, I'm going to go shoot and kill this woman. But if you do something, and again, we broke down the elements of the New Mexico state law in there, performing a lawful act in a way without due care and circumspection such that someone dies. Due care and circumspection. You had mentioned, Bill, that you've worked on sets with firearms in shows and productions. Now, if it's a block gun, a plastic gun, an inert gun, we don't have to necessarily be so careful with it. But if you're using a real live fireable firearm, do we not at least make sure they're unloaded when we hand them to people?
Well, I don't understand why there's even live ammunition present.
That's one of the biggest problems. And any movies that you don't use You don't use a live firearm. Now, does it happen? Yes. And there are some techniques you can do to
Mm-hmm.
use a live firearm on set. But first of all, don't ever have him. It's like when Scott talks in our classes about cleaning a gun, and this is just cleaning. Is like, listen, there's no ammo in the room with me when I'm cleaning my gun. If you're doing it on a movie set, there is no ammunition anywhere on that set. Most of the time, we don't even use firearms that are capable of firing. And even, Sully, even with those firearms, the blank firing guns, we
Yeah.
still use the same precautions that we do with anything else.
Right.
Most of the time, if you see a shot where a person is pointing a gun at someone and they pull the trigger, they aren't, when the shot is actually filmed, you're going to have a cutaway. They're not even shooting it at a person, the blank. They're shooting it at just dead air.
Right. And beyond that, even if we're using blanks, okay, we're still checking the barrel every time for obstructions. R.I.P. Brendan Lee. We go through and, you don't even shoot a blank at someone within a certain range. And to go a step further than that, how much gets put in post-production. Nowadays, with what they can do electronically, the actual filmed may be a click, but guess what? In post, it can get changed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. We've got, so far, one person in the chat chirps up, he likely can't admit it for legal reasons. I would imagine his lawyer has told him not to admit any wrongdoing because it could derail his defense.
That's, I guess, a good point.
That may be.
That's a valid point.
I thought it was interesting also on the civil side. I know that her husband did file civil suit, and as part of the settlement of the civil suit, that their husband is now made an executive producer of the movie, which did go back and finish filming starting in April of this year and has since wrapped. Hasn't come out yet. And, also some undisclosed financial considerations. So, I mean, he's not really too much worried on the civil suit from the husband or whatever. And, I don't know. This should never have gotten here, at least from my side. But
Right.
that's, and like you said, the 4 rules. I do it when I teach Guns 101 or CWP. We start with, okay, there's 4 things you're going to hear. And I do the adult rules and I do the kids' rules. Scott, I don't think you've ever seen me do the kids' rules, though.
No.
Okay, I start, and I'll do it with like 3 and 4 years olds. If you find a gun, stop. Don't touch. Run away. Find an adult. And I'll get them doing that, back and forth. You know what? We teach stop, drop, and roll in the schools.
Right.
If we can start at 3rd and 4th, 3 and 4 year olds, getting them to do that, I'm good with it.
Well, like you said, any one of the 4 rules, if even if you have your finger in the trigger, which you shouldn't, if it's pointed in a safe direction and it goes off by accident or negligently, it's still in a safe direction. No harm.
Right.
No harm, no foul.
And the interesting thing is, again, I don't know, I know we all sort of got blindsided with the topic a little bit, but watching the interview, well, I never would have put my finger in the trigger. I know better than that. Okay.
It didn't go off by itself.
Well, and what my hypothesis has been in reviewing it is he had his finger, as he would, all over the trigger all day. Most non-firearms owners, that's where it ends up to begin with. It's trained to have it up on the frame of the slide, wherever. Well, with it being an old cowboy revolver, it's fine to have your hand on the trigger all day long because it wasn't cocked. In that set, in that shoot, he was aiming it and she was having him cock it back and forth.
Oh.
If his finger has been there all day, as the pictures might indicate, what was different this time? He cocked it and it just, bang.
Yeah, you can't keep your finger on the single action revolver trigger because, that's how you fan the trigger. That's how you fan it.
It, yeah. And again, it is what it is, unfortunately. And like I said, I don't think for a second that he woke up that morning and decided that, he wanted to go out and shoot this lady. I don't
Absolutely.
see that.
Mhm.
But pretty, ugly as far as the, safety wise. Let's see what I've got here. And again, he never had his finger on the trigger because he knew better than that. That's our quote, right?
Right.
Okay. Let me see here. So I can just be a big meanie.
It might be better if he just said no comment. Just, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, had he, again, one of the things that lit the fire on me with this case was when he went out and said the whole big hour-long interview with George Stephanopoulos, how people are picking on him about this. Really? People are picking on you. Well, they're saying awful things about me. Okay?
I bet.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know.
See
Even
here.
firearms instructors, anybody can have an accident.
Yes.
How many videos do we see with? So it's not that he's a bad person. It's not his character. It's nothing about. It's just it happened. It's just he had a negligent act that gun went off.
Right. And if we come to here, I'm going to blow that up as best I can. He'd never have his finger on the trigger. He knows better than that.
Not apparently.
What's that? Poking out the other side of the trigger guard.
Yeah, it's in the trigger there.
And that's in the church. Those pictures were taken within a day or two of the actual discharge that happened. So that gives you a gauge on it.
Goodness.
And that's not the only one. That's just one I pulled up. And that's out of their investigation. That's out of the Sheriff's Department investigation. They have a 551-page investigation. I will say to everybody who's in the chat, we've got about 15 people watching back and forth now. If you want to look at any of these pictures for yourself, if you want to look at the investigative report, the 551-page report, it is all posted up on the Locals account. I couldn't attach it to YouTube or to Rumble, but in the Gun Club Locals account, I put the whole thing up there. So that way you can go in there and look, download the PDF file for yourself, look at the pictures for yourself, look at the video of how a single action versus a double action works for yourself. And it's all there for free access to anybody. So again, when I didn't wake up one morning and decide I want to be mean to Alec. But again, watching that video with George Stephanopoulos was, quit playing the victim, dude. It happened. It's awful. It's tragic. But you're not the victim in this. And now I will say that, is there plenty of room to go around? Yes, the armor has been charged also. She goes to trial either next month or the month after.
And I completely agree with that.
Yes.
Yes.
On a traditional film set, an armorer is supposed to maintain possession of the firearm prop until right before the scene is to be shot. Then the firearm prop is given to the actor. The actor and the armorer are supposed to ensure that it is not in a dangerous position, i.e. loaded if it's an actual firearm. And then the actor takes possession of it. As soon as the scene is stopped, the armorer takes possession of the firearm. Right. Actors don't walk around set when they're not being shot with these firearms in their holsters.
Right. Now, also, since you've worked as an armorer, I have not worked as an armorer or done anything in firearms on the set. I've done the set medic, but since you've been in that role, if you were bringing me, and we know it's a fireable, it's not a plastic block, inert, graphics printed something. If you were bringing me a firearm that I would be using, and you were handing it to me, would you be the least bit offended, upset, or torn up with me, or any actor, if they wanted to physically inspect it in front of you to make sure there was nothing live in the chamber?
I would be offended if you didn't. And I actually educated some of the actors and actresses about how to check their firearms. Now, some of them, the prop guns, they
Right.
didn't have a true action.
Right.
But for the ones that did, yeah, I mean, I would stand there and make sure they looked through them. And you know what? If we were shooting, when you shoot a movie, a film, video, whatever, you typically have a bunch of very short takes. Like you
Right.
could have 15, 20 takes because they're going to do a bunch just so that the director gets the one that looks just like they want. So
Right.
you're not going to give the gun back and forth in between these 15, 20 takes. The armor is on set. The armor is present when all of this is happening. But as soon as they are done with that and they're going to switch to another, either shot or, they're going to move the cameras or whatever, that's it.
Mm-hmm. Now, on this one, there were some issues. I don't know whether you caught the armorer was doing another prop job as well, non-firearms related. She would arrive at the set in the morning, load the weapons with what was supposed to be dummy rounds, left them on a cart
Yep.
accessible on the set. The AD, David Hall, who has already taken a plea, was the one who picked up the gun, never checked it, brought it over to him, told him it was a cold gun, quote unquote terms, cold gun, that's in the report. And so, and again, this difference we went through in one of my videos, the different types of live versus dummy versus blank, whether you've got BB rattling around in it or holes drilled in it or, because again, depending on the shot they're trying to get, with a revolver, if you're looking at the front of the cylinder, you'll see if there's not a round there. You'll see if it's, a crimp or something else. So what they'll do is they'll make a cartridge case with a round on the front so it can be seen from that side,
Right.
but there's no primer and no powder. Or if there's a fake primer in it, then there's a hole drilled in the side of it. So, if you're watching a police officer load a revolver, it looks real, but there's a rattler in it, so you know it's not. If you're watching from the front end, you can see the bullets. It looks real. Everything looks real, but so there's a technique to it. It's not just okay, there's nothing there, but again, you hand it to someone, they should be checking it.
I think the biggest problem with that is you're talking about, and I'm not going to generalize too much here, but you're talking about a lot of folks that aren't savvy with firearms. They don't understand the basics, and they're making a lot of assumptions about it. Just like I see a lot of folks make assumptions all the time about them, unfortunately.
Right. And that's sort of how this channel was born. But yeah, go on.
No, and that's exactly it. I'm actually working right now on putting together a class for people in the film industry here in the local area, and it's a familiarization to show them a few things. First of all, the exact topic we're talking about, safe handling of a firearm. The second one is, what do they actually do? I can tell that all three of us could talk for hours about ridiculous gun footage in Hollywood movies. And
Right.
third, get some realistic hands-on experience. I mean, what does a suppressor actually sound like? It doesn't sound like what most TV shows have it.
Right.
And I think those type of things would be very helpful if folks that are in that industry would just get some practical hands-on experience.
Right. And it's interesting because you mentioned in that industry, and I think even in general, there's a vast majority of the population that does not know that, what does a suppressor really sound like? Or, I had someone, and I'm not going to call them out, but it was a student, and I happened to make a comment about, taxable items or NFA items, like suppressors. And they looked at me kind of funny. Well, silencers, but they don't silence anything. They suppress or muffle it. Aren't those illegal? I was like, there's a whole case of them up at the range we just left.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, yeah, they're taxable items, but they're not, illegal. They're illegal to have if you don't have an NFA stamp and everything on it, but whatever. But, part of why we do this is I wanted to be able to educate people. I wanted to have a platform where people could learn more about firearms, because the more they understand, I think the better off we are as a whole.
Oh, that's something Scott and I love, is when people will ask questions, and we tell them, ask anything.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Right. I mean, I would much rather people ask us the questions, and we, even if we've been asked 1,000 times, let's do the 1,001st time, and we'll answer it and help them move on.
Mm-hmm. And what's like anything, I I think the one big problem we have is people not understanding, and it would be the same thing. Again, I grew up not around here. I ain't from around here. In case y'all didn't notice that, Scott. I grew up in New York City.
Yeah, I'm
Now
from upstate New York. So
okay, there are people, and you can vouch for this, who were born and raised in the city, who have never driven a car and don't have a driver's license, because quite frankly, you don't need one. You grow up, there's cabs, there's buses, there's subways, there's trains. You know, when I went to New York last time in 2018, we were up there for several days. We never had a car, never thought twice about it. As a matter of fact, we wanted to go out, look at my old hometown. We looked at the house I grew up in. We went to the pizza place up the road from my high school for lunch one day. But the thing was, we didn't need a car. Why would you need a car? We'll just hop on the train, go out to Jamaica, do this, do that. We decided that night when we were going back to the airport to LaGuardia to fly back down, it was, okay, well, we'll take an Uber this time. But we hadn't most of the time. We
Right.
just bopped around, did our thing. Well, if someone there moved down here, it would be totally foreign. This whole concept of driver's licenses and everything else. Well, there are people who grew up without firearms in their world.
which is fine.
Scott, I want you to talk about this for a second, because a lot of people make assumptions, especially when it comes to law enforcement. I want Scott to speak of this because he's been a training officer and an instructor forever.
You're going right down. You're going right down the road I was going to go to. This is what I said I was going to blindside you with. He's doing it instead. Well played, sir.
Even when new police officers get hired, they often have very little firearms experience. Scott, I mean, what have you run into?
That's more frequent than I think a lot of people would expect. There's a lot of people. We have a lot of officers. They're great officers. They just haven't been around firearms. I feel like a lot of times with the automatic, if you're a police officer, that must be a good shot. Well, that's definitely not necessarily the case. You can be an excellent police officer. Police work is a people business, so you're great at taking care of the calls, great with people, doing and be a wonderful officer, and not have a lot of gun skills other than what you've been trained as an officer. So, and we do have people that have never fired a gun and come on board, and they're great officers.
Right. And the interesting thing, and where I was going to bring this up, was a lot of people think, oh, well, if I'm going to ask anyone about a firearm something, I need to ask a police officer. And I was explaining to them, at least from my experience in North Carolina, that officer may not know a lot about firearms. They sure didn't go pick their own out.
Right.
Yeah.
They went and they were issued this one, and the serial numbers all matched, and they went out and they qualified with it, and hopefully it goes in their holster and it sits there until they go out 6 months later or so.
Yeah, they'll you give them a gun and they know how to use that one because you trained them. But there's so many different types of platforms and different styles, and some with safeties and some without. You know that they may not know how to handle every gun that comes across their plate.
Right. And then they run into some investigator or some old school officer, and they look, and of course he's like, should someone tell the lieutenant that his gun is cocked? Don't tell him that. He knows.
Yeah, but it's amazing. I mean, when I was a rookie cop, I had a little experience with pistols, but there were several times when I would take firearms out of a car or something, when I was searching a car after an arrest, and I had no idea how to clear it. I'm like, there's a bolt on here somewhere I can pull back, I'm sure,
Yeah, and with enough basic foundation, you can probably figure it out safely. And if you
Right,
can't figure it out, at least you're still handling it safely. You have enough foundation for that. And there's nothing wrong with that.
right,
That happens a lot. You get a partner and you say, "Hey, I've never seen this kind of gun. Can you clear this?" And of course, you're safe with it because you've learned enough to be safe with it.
right.
Yeah, I mean, if you're pointing it in a safe direction and you keep your finger off the trigger, you know, you're
Those are two big ones.
probably well. Just let's just take those two
Yeah,
because I don't have a target, and I'm assuming it's loaded because I'm trying to clear it. But just
right,
those two, if I'm messing around with trying to find a bolt to open, I'm probably going to be okay. But heaven forbid, if for some reason the thing I did sets the gun off, even though I'm not touching the trigger, at least it's pointing in a safe direction, and
hmm
it's going to make me poop my pants. But that's probably about all that's going to happen if it's pointing in a safe direction.
Right.
right. And as I was explaining to a couple of people, like it's nothing pro or anti. I'm not trying to take a shot at law enforcement at all, but a lot of them are not gun people.
Right.
It's a tool they carry on their belt among all sorts of other wonderful tools and utilities and everything else. And again, like you said, they're proficient relatively with the operations of the one they have. But I mean, I remember when they had the transition up in North Carolina when they went from wheel guns to SIG P226s and 220s. And there was a learning curve.
Yeah.
And, there were a lot of the, people up there who were like, okay, because those SIGs, they had the decockers on them and everything else. And yeah, that's normalcy.
Oh yeah,
But they're, not automatically become firearm enthusiasts or experts or, again, they don't, why do I carry this ammunition? Well, that's what they gave me.
Right.
Why do I carry that gun? Because it was in the box they handed me.
yeah.
Well, what about this caliber? Well, I don't know. I don't think that goes in this. Yeah. How many
Right.
times a year do you go to the range? Well, yeah, once a year. Why?
Which that opens up another box because even as an officer, I'm kind of try to stay on them. If you're gonna once what we do for qualifications is not enough. They need to get it out and dust it off and do a little bit of practicing on their own, which we're trying to promote more of that.
Well, I'll tell you my favorite way to promote it. And I do this a lot with my CWP people when they ask about how often should we go to the range or whatever else. You want a trip to Hawaii. You're getting on that plane at San Francisco, getting ready to fly to Hawaii. You're getting on at Dallas, getting ready to fly to Hawaii. The pilot comes out and announces that the last time he's been in control of a plane was the date that you last went to the range. Do you stay on that plane?
That's a good example.
Do you stay on that plane? Well, hell no. Why? Why not? Or why do you?
Right. Now we do go more than once a year, but a lot of the minimum standard is one qualification a year.
Yeah.
So,
And the
Yeah.
thing was, I don't know down here. I know where I was in North Carolina, um, law enforcement was minimum 70 score required on the standard B27 target, and our agency required 80%.
good.
And the joke among the people who were in the reserves, we said if you come in under 85%, you go back in within the next 6 months to clean up your shit. And it was always pushed that way. And it was, we joked about it that, we slightly higher than the state minimum standard. And when the sheriff was asked why one time, he said part of it was he wanted people to be confident in their tools. That's not, I just passed by the minimum.
Right.
Yeah. That officer who scores a 70.2, he has a question about. He wants people to try to excel. Let's get some numbers up there. So,
I knew there were people that I served with. Scott knows who I'm talking about. I will not name names.
okay.
But there were people that I served with that if I was in a gunfight, I couldn't decide if I wanted to stand in front of them or behind them because I'm not sure which would be safer. But luckily, that never happened.
Right.
Right.
But, and I mean, we were fortunate because there was a local indoor range up there, very nice indoor range. And one of the guys who was a reserve with me lived next door to the couple that owned it. and it was a little mom and pop range, and we were, free in there anytime, and ammo would cost anytime. And so we were in there minimum once a month. I mean, half the time we'd be stopping in there for coffee on our way to work. Because we could go there, get coffee, chat, look at the newest toys, whatever else. Maybe do a little shooting, maybe not. Maybe they needed a hand with something, maybe they didn't. Again, it was a very small family-run operation.
Even as an instructor, I find myself, I was just telling a friend of mine about this the other day. I find myself, if I'm not careful, I spend more time teaching on the range, helping others, and I have to stop and realize, hey, I haven't shot in a while. It's time for me to put some rounds down range, keep my own proficiency up. It's easy to not do enough if you're not careful.
Well, I've been very fortunate of late. I know one of the people is in our chat, but I've had 2 or 3 friends who are learning, and we're talking learning from the ground up. And I've been taking them one by one to the range. And so a lot of times they'll take and do a magazine, I'll do a magazine. I'll say, okay, now let's try to do it this way, where you're letting, the trigger reset but not come all the way back to the start. Come to where you feel it break and then come back to the reset, a little bit more control on your second shot. Okay, now let's work on malfunction clearing. Let's work on this. And again, building skills bit by bit, but it's also my fun, it's my stress relief. And seeing them succeed has been wonderful. And let's say I've got one of them in the chat tonight so far. We may have more coming wandering in at some point, who knows. But again, building the skills, because that's where confidence and proficiency comes in.
Yep, absolutely. I'd like to. How many people are on right now in the chat?
We have got 11 sitting in the chat right now. 11 on Rumble, 0 on YouTube, which YouTube's numbers have been really bad. In fact, I was a little bit surprised when I got 2,000 views on that short the other day. I was like,
hey, that works perfect. So here's a question for everybody in chat right now. I want them to put in chat, how often does somebody need to go and shoot to be proficient? What is their opinion? How often does somebody need to get to a range in order to be proficient? And we'll let the definition of proficient be up to the user, up to whatever they think.
Okay. Well, y'all,
I like
he's
that.
put it out there. I think that's interesting. And the other thing I'll say is, if you went to drive a car today and you hadn't sat behind the wheel of a car since the last time you went to the range, how scary would that be?
I'd be okay.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that about the proficient thing, because when you were talking, Bill, first thing I was thinking is, the first thing I thought of when you said is, who's defining proficient, right?
Right.
Hitting the broadside of a barn, being a marksman, or you don't have to even be a marksman to handle your gun proficiently. Like to be be able to reload and load safely and be good on the draw and the whole defensive part of using a firearm. Or is that part of proficiency? Or is proficiency definition being able to take your time, take 10 minutes to get one round off and be accurate, right? So how do you, when we're talking self-defense, that opens up a whole nother topic of, what is proficient mean?
Right. And then when you talk about self-defense, where do people practice? One of the things that Scott and I like to do is we'll take people up to the 3-foot line, because that's typically where most self-defense situations take place. And then we'll back them up a little bit so they don't blow the paper apart on their target with the muzzle blast. But we practice from that range, because it's going to feel really weird shooting that close. If all you're doing is practicing at 5 yards, 10 yards, 15 yards, at 3 feet, it almost feels like you shouldn't shoot, like something is just wrong mentally. So, you got to think about, and then aiming. Who aims at 3 feet away?
Right.
I don't aim.
Right.
it's going right where I'm pointing that gun.
Yeah,
I'm not looking at the sights.
You're not using the sights at 3 to 5 feet. You don't need to. So
Right. It's a whole different skill set. It's more of speed to target than it is, getting the target in your sights at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're getting a couple of answers have come in so far. Um, let's see. One person says at least monthly.
Okay.
And then one person who is my special student, she's my teacher's pet, so to speak. She says, I think it depends on your current skill level. I probably need at least once per week to be what I would consider proficient, but somebody with much more experience could go less and still maintain proficiency.
That's a good answer.
Mm-hmm.
And
I
that's
think,
kind of what I was fishing for there is, it depends. I like the once per month answer. If everyone who's carried a firearm on a regular basis practiced once a month, that would be very, very nice.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's really what you need to be proficient. Scott and I don't need to go out once a month to be proficient. Would it be good? Absolutely. Going once a week would be great. But we've been shooting for years, and intentionally practicing, not just standing in front of a paper target. And so, maybe we can go out every, 2, 3, 4 months, put in some good training and be perfectly fine. Here's what gets me, Sully, and I shared this last time I was on your podcast. In state of South Carolina, which is what I talk about because that's where I am, where you are.
Right.
The only thing that's required to carry a gun concealed or even open carry is to get your permit. And to get your permit, you have to shoot 25 rounds, get 70% of those rounds into a target that's as big as me. And I'm not a very small guy. So, and then by the way, once you get your permit, how often do you have to shoot to keep your permit from that point?
0 required.
For life.
Never. You never have to
practice.
And see, that's where we get into this when I teach the CWP classes. Because, again, I sit there and I teach all the laws and the legals and the parts of the gun, everything we have to. But I'm also trying to teach effective habits down the line.
So to finish my thought.
No, sorry.
Well, you're fine. If you only have to shoot once, those people scare me. Those people scare me because they get their gun and they put it in their pocket or their pocketbook or, holster it on their side, whatever they do. And they go la-di-da around for the next 15, 20 years. And then all of a sudden, a critical incident happens. And how do they react? What do they do? Are they effective? Do they hurt someone instead of helping the situation? Do they hurt it? That's the thing that scares me.
Have they even cleaned it in 15 or 20 years?
Right. And, I love the Second Amendment. I mean, the three of us in here, we are huge Second Amendment supporters, all three of us. And if you're a responsible gun owner using the Second Amendment, you need to practice in order to be responsible.
Well, you owe it to your family. You owe it to your loved ones to be proficient with it and those around you in public. You just.
Right. And I always refer, and I did this with my new paramedics also. Your first EMT card, your first paramedic card. It's a learner's permit. It means that somebody down in Columbia thinks you're not too dangerous to put on the street. Now go learn something. Well, same thing with your first driver's license. Congratulations. You're, not that, not that dangerous. But the day you get your driver's license, you wouldn't want to be doing, 285 in Atlanta at 5 o'clock.
Right.
No.
You build skills over time, and skills can degrade with lack over time. Mel says that is why I am the star student. And she also says, I never really thought about CWB being active for life with no renewal or,
Well,
yes.
there are renewals, but you don't have to shoot again or take a class again.
Right.
They just do another background check to make sure something hasn't changed, at least for South Carolina.
Right.
Something hasn't changed in your criminal history.
Now, I mean, and the other thing is, this is where I catch some grief sometimes on the constitutional carry side. I understand the states that have done it. I understand, I don't have to go and apply to the government for a right to speak freely, or I don't have to apply to the government for any of my other constitutional rights. Why do I have to do that? I get that. But the thing is, I also say the people who are in that situation, it puts an amazing onus and responsibility on them to know the law. Because, I mean, we all teach South Carolina CWP. We know that we're going to cover the laws and where you can and can't carry and how to interact with law enforcement, all this stuff as part of the class. You get this information. If someone is in a constitutional carry state, well, they turn 21 and they can't load a gun. I get it's a constitutional right, and I'm as pro 2A as everyone, but that puts the burden on them because, as we all know, we can finish it out. Ignorance of the law is not an
Not an excuse.
right. So if they have a constitutional carry state, and they say, well, constitutional carry, or they just apply for a permit on paper type thing, and they get a card from the state, but they haven't had to go through any kind of legal class or training. Well, I've got this permit, so of course I can carry it in my purse into my kid's elementary school, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, when they get arrested for it and they can't get that permit anymore and they catch their first felony. Yeah. It's like that Postal Service situation right now. I don't know if you've been following that at all.
No.
Okay. We all know we can't carry on postal property because it's a federal facility. Well, a postal worker in Florida carried and got caught carrying and is now fighting it to try to get that law changed. And the initial, I don't know if the law is being changed, but so far his case is going fairly positively. But how many people, and I always talk about it in my classes about federal buildings, who's gone to a federal building in the last couple of weeks? Anyone been to a post office? Yeah. Anyone's gone to a post office? If it's in a strip mall, then common parking is not considered federal property. If it's on its own piece of property, then what you have in your glove box when you drive into the parking lot is on federal property.
Yep.
Think about that.
Right.
And we talk about that because I want my students not only to know, all the lethal force stuff, but where you can, where you can't, where are the hiccups, where are the, fine points, because I don't want them to get in that. So, but, let's see here. What do we have going on here? I never really, that's terrifying. Think about the 80-year-old blue hairs out on the roads driving, now put a gun in their hands.
I've seen that in my class.
Hey, I resemble that remark.
I'm never going to be
not blue, it's gray.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Hair.
What's that?
I'm not worried about it because I'll never have that much hair to tell.
There you go. But, hey, I'd rather mine turn gray than turn loose. But, again, hopefully those individuals who have not maintained proficiency will freeze up and not draw and do something stupid.
Yeah, exactly.
But, yeah, because I know I preach in class. Folks, you wouldn't want to be on that plane. The first day you've got your driver's license, would you let your kid, they've just got their learner's permit, would you let them drive the new family car down through 285 in Atlanta? No. They're not quite up to that yet, are they? They need to get some experience, yeah? Just saying.
Yeah, that's a great example.
When you get your permit in the mail, keep that in mind.
Oh, yeah.
I also use the aircraft thing. I know, Bill, you're a pilot, so you'll get this whole thing. Just because you're qualified on the Cessna doesn't mean you need to be playing with a 737.
No, but all of us pilots have that secret dream of being on an airliner and having the stewardess or the flight attendant call out, "Is there a pilot on board?" So I'm just telling you, no matter what our qualification is, we're waiting for that day.
Now, the interesting thing is, I have a friend of mine, not wrong with a friend, but a contact who is a 737 type rating examiner. He's a captain with 20 plus over in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
He did a virtual online type rating class that I took. I passed his online type rating class in a 737.
I believe it.
Mm-hmm. But
I
yeah,
mean,
that was
you just have to know what buttons to push and what levers to pull. So
very much, yeah. What to dial in on the autopilot, how to set it, VNav, yeah.
Talk on the radio. Maybe they can talk you through some of that, right?
A lot of it, yeah. But yeah.
exactly.
But so yeah. So if it's a Boeing product, I'm pretty good. If it's Airbus, not so much. Speaking of Boeing, did you hear one of their 757s had a wheel fall off in Atlanta today?
No.
I hadn't heard
Yeah.
that yet.
Yeah. Boeing 757 taxiing out onto the runway. One of the wheels rolled off the nose gear. The plane behind him had to call over ATC and tell him.
Glad they were on the ground when it happened.
Yes. Think about that coming through your roof. Those wheels are big.
Yeah.
They're bigger than they look.
Well, there was a 747 that lost one on takeoff about half a year ago, and it was quite impressive to watch fly through the air and bounce on the ground several times.
Mm-hmm. But hey, at least the door didn't come off.
Yeah.
And they're now saying that the bolts on that door, there's no evidence they were ever there.
Oh, wow.
I've been following that pretty closely.
Oh, yeah, I've been following it very closely.
I saw a little bit of it.
What?
I saw a little bit of that. I hadn't followed it, though.
Yeah, it's a little scary. But
So
what else do we have?
What's that?
I thought it was interesting, again, getting back to the whole law enforcement side. A law enforcement officer may be really proficient with his or her firearm, but that may be the one that they have in their life that they've,
Right.
I think a lot of times people get the idea of, oh, well, they're cops, so they got to be gun people. And it's like, oh, no, there were plenty that I found in my career that were not.
Absolutely correct.
And the interesting thing was, when I was doing the reserve thing years and years ago, one of the other reserves, he had left one sheriff's office because of a basically change in election or change in the guard, so to speak. And he had been the firearms instructor under his previous sheriff for like 5 years. So anyone coming in there, one of the things he did for the sheriff's department that he was reserving at to keep his star up was, everything. Not just, okay, we don't just need to know proficiency on these, we need to know all these, and oh, by the way, these 5 strange things were recovered last month, and let's go over how they work. Yeah.
That's a great idea.
But he said, look, anything once it's done where it doesn't have to be, kept secured as evidence anymore, what he was doing was he was documenting the unique stuff with what's different about this, what's coming out. Because that was when, semi-autos were coming out all over the place with different kinds of decockings and safeties and, was Beretta that had like an up-down switch on the back of it? Had like a 3-position selector switch?
Oh, I don't know.
Beretta 92 maybe? It's been forever.
3-position? I mean, kind of. You have the safe, fire, and decock.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Depending on the version of the 92, they had it with and without that.
Okay. Yeah, but I think it was Beretta, one of them, because he would actually get the owner's manuals to these weird things. Once it no longer had to be held, he'd get pictures of it, get owner's manuals, and he was like, okay, this is what all's out there, gentlemen. This is what you might find tomorrow night.
Oh, yeah.
Because this one looks weird, and this one is this, and okay. Because he wanted us to at least have a little bit more idea. Because that was, HK had a squeeze cocker at the time, those P7, M8, and M13s, and
those
we were seeing all kinds of weird stuff.
Yeah.
Mel says, Sully, I trust you with my life around firearms of any kind, but don't ask me to fly on a plane if you're behind the wheel.
I'm going to second that.
Thanks.
I don't know. I've flown with Bill. I can tell you that. I've been on a plane with Bill.
There you go.
How was the landing?
I was going to say the landing was, I won't it was amazing. We hit some crosswinds all of a sudden, and I kept noticing, and he didn't say a word, but I kept noticing the wings were going like this, right as we're coming towards the runway. And I thought, well, doesn't that? I think the wings are going to touch the ground first because we were almost on the ground, and all of a sudden we were going straight. And I said, "Are we on the ground?" And he said, "Yeah." I never felt this touch. And later he said, later, thank goodness he waited till later. He said, by the way, that was the heaviest crosswind I ever had to land in. So apparently a crosswind came up when we were coming in for landing, and he didn't freak me out prior to the landing. So that
was a little of everything, I think, because we were going every direction. But I even said to him in the air, he's like, "Have you done this before?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, it's nothing." I lied.
You're right.
I kept thinking the wing was going to touch first. We were getting in such an angle.
Yeah. Now look at the good side. At least I know how to dial up the autopilot. That's the important part. Truthfully, I was 730 on a Big Bird. Truthfully, that's and we just hope they've got ILS at the runway.
Exactly,
like a Cat 3 ILS. But yeah. But well, I've enjoyed it, gentlemen. What else do y'all have to talk about?
So, I don't know.
Yeah.
We beat up on Alec Baldwin enough.
Well, enough is a good question, but I agree. We've done that enough for today.
I appreciate being here. I think it's great, Sully. I appreciate you having me on board.
We started this up because I enjoy the firearms, and it was talking about, you look at some of the early stuff, it's not quite as organized as this, but on the other side, it's like, hey, look, I want people, and this is John Q or Mary S. Public sitting at home, to be able to learn a little something, to be able to see that firearms instructors don't bite. How many people you think have driven, now again, not naming brand names or anything, but you mentioned where you work. How many people have driven past the gun range right there in Main Street where you work, that I go over there periodically? I mean, I'm on a first name basis with about half the people there, and go there all the time, and Minnie has gone there a time or two. Going through the whole thing, how many are like, I don't know about, they're almost intimidated to go to a range and ask a question.
Yeah,
they're not anti-gun, they're not negative towards guns, but they don't even know how to break that glass wall that,
That's why I like that you're doing this. There's just not enough basic, there's a lot of advanced stuff you can go on and see, but I like that we just have like a general conversation, and it's great to chat. People can come in and ask questions, and I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. We got a great question here. I'm curious, how does the AB shooting compare to the others, such as Brandon Lee? Okay. Bill, you want to go first, or you want me to drive this?
No, go ahead.
Okay. In the situation with Brandon Lee and the filming of The Crow, they were using blank rounds. Now, a blank is still going to have a primer, it's still going to have powder, it's still going to have the casing, but it's crimped down at the end. And so it'll make a big bang, but theoretically no projectile is coming out. Unfortunately, some wadding from something that was used earlier in the day was stuck in the barrel. Much like when we're in class and we talk about a squib load or something else. Anything that's in the barrel is in the way of that oomph coming out. So, when the shot was fired with Brandon Lee, the primer activated, it started the powder burning, it sent the bang out, but wasn't supposed to have any projectile with it. Unfortunately, the object lodged in the barrel, went downrange, thus it happened. The difference with the Alec Baldwin was, that wasn't a blank. That was actually just a real live bullet. Instead of it having debris in the barrel, it had a real live bullet in the end, and it went out, and same difference.
And let me point out one more thing about Brandon Lee. When that thing happened with Brandon Lee, they actually that's when they made changes in the movie industry for how firearms are used on set. That's when they stopped using blank guns that had open barrels at the end. You'll notice, if you ever look at a blank pistol or a blank shooting firearm, the barrel actually has a block in it. And then there's there are holes drilled that vent out the gases when it's fired. So that can't happen because that's exactly it. There was just an obstruction in the barrel. It fired, it killed him, and it was a freak accident. Um, how could it have been? How could it have been avoided if the barrel had been checked? We
Right.
talked about that. If you fire a blank from a firearm that doesn't have a barrel blocked, you need to check the barrel every time you fire a blank. Yes, if
Mm-hmm.
you're firing in succession and you don't have a person in front of you, okay, fine, fire all the blanks and then check the barrel. But
Right.
if you're ever going to point it at a person and fire, which I again don't recommend because they make special prop guns for that. You have to follow the procedures.
Right. And to go a step further, they've got in, I was reading a bunch of the SAG stuff, they have decreased power blanks, quarter blanks, and different things like that. Billy may be more familiar because even a full power blank at close range is going to let a shockwave off,
Yeah,
Hmm.
hot
even
gases.
without there being anything coming out. And they don't want to subject someone to that shockwave, even without it having anything, a projectile or a physical impediment. But you could have had, a full power blank, and if someone had dropped a gun into the mud and it had a dirt plug in it, guess what? It could still be, injure someone.
Yeah, and what was that, Scott? Because I think you were going to say what I
Yeah,
was.
even the hot gases and burnt powder that come out the end. I mean, 3 to 5 feet, you're still getting that person gets, you know, powder burns and burnt stuff in their eye or whatever. Like you have the
Mm-hmm.
hot gases that come out the barrel and
Mm-hmm.
travel a little ways. So
Yeah.
Yeah, you just can't do that. There's too many dangers. I think people associate blanks with safe, and that's not the case. You can fire a blank pistol safely if it's the correct type of pistol. I
Mm-hmm.
have some 38 blanks that I've used on movie sets before. And number one, typically these are low budget films. They don't have blank pistols. So
Right.
those are the type of things you can't fire if you're pointing at somebody.
Right.
So,
the 38 wad cutters that are just flat on the end. The bullet is flat with the shell casing. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't look like a bullet. I've heard of incidents with that, and it was an incident. I won't talk about where. It wasn't in Simpsonville or even in South Carolina, but an incident where they thought that was a blank because it was flat on the end. It was actually a wad cutter.
it was
Mm-hmm.
police training, right?
Well, it wasn't. Yes, it was police training. I won't say. It was in a class that I took. That's a nationwide thing that they told the story about what happened and how that
Mm-hmm.
was. And actually, the person that thought it was a blank was an officer. Said, "Hey, I've got some blanks for 38s. I'll bring them." And someone said, "Sure, bring them." And they thought it was a blank, and it was not a blank. It was the wad cutter.
Right. Now, I was going to say, just so anyone can see what he's talking about, I want to see if I can pull this up real quickly, because that's a great point. What does a blank really look like? Because, again, if you think you've got something that's a blank, maybe it is, maybe it is not, and we don't know. And that's where people get in trouble. I'm going to share this screen over here. Excellent point to bring up. Here is this is wad cutter ammo. Now, if we look real carefully at that, doesn't look like there's any bullet there.
Right.
Guess what? There is a projectile crimped down into that casing. And so those are not blanks, those are live rounds. And there will be a slug of whatever the projectile or lead or whatever that comes out. I've seen them in brass and I've seen them in lead.
Yeah, it looks like just a flat casing, like nothing's going to come out of it.
Right. And that's why, again, making sure. Because I can see where someone, would say that, oh, I've got some blanks. Hey, great. Unfortunately, that's not blanks.
And it comes back to what we said at the very beginning of this episode, which is the 4 cardinal rules of firearm safety.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also comes back in a large point to say, if you don't know, don't ever be afraid to ask. Um, I'm the biggest believer in if there's a question or something, you're not sure about something, please ask someone. This is what the dummy rounds look like that get used. Well, this is a couple of different versions of them here that we had for dummy rounds. Now, if you're looking at these, you can see where there's a hole drilled in the side of that.
Mm-hmm.
There is no doubt among anyone in this room that there's no powder in there. The one on the top that is sealed all the way around, it looks real. If you take it, there's no powder in it, there's a BB in it or a pellet in it, and you can actually shake it and hear something rattling around.
Mm-hmm.
The ones on the right, the primers are already detented. They've probably been fired 5-10 times as dummies. But if you were doing, say, a movie set and a police officer was loading his gun, he could load them with those things on top and no one would know the difference.
Right.
So again, it's just, the way things work. And, these on the bottom, no primer, holes on the side of them. So in theory, in some way, if it was a dummy or should have been a dummy in the 45 long Colt, that Alec had, there were ways that you could tell pretty quickly by picking the 6 rounds out of it, looking at them, as the case may be, and saying, one of them doesn't look the same as the others.
Well,
which after the accident happened, that was actually what they said. It was kind of strange because one of them didn't look like the others.
Just my mind just can't get away from why was there live ammo anywhere on the set?
Part of it was, the playing, yes. Part of it was also before the movie was shooting, they did a firearms training day. They did a couple of them for the people who were going to be handling guns. So when they did the training,
with live rounds,
yes.
mm-hmm.
Now the interesting thing was, as we go through this whole thing, down the line, they did the training with live rounds, but one of the statements was when Mr. Baldwin was supposed to be doing his training, he was not particularly attentive in class, according to the statements given to law enforcement, that he was busy on his phone most of the day. He knew better. And I'm going to say this one, do you think maybe Alec Baldwin is, amazing as he is, decided that this 21-year-old female purple-haired armorer couldn't teach him anything? Could he be that misogynistic and that sexist that this little girl wasn't worth listening to and he had better things to do? Just a thought. Because everybody who was involved said that she was struggling to get him to do anything that she said to do. Yeah. And to me, and now I will say this, she's green as grass in this stuff. She's only been doing this for 8 months before the shooting happened. But her father has shot with Moss and everybody. Her father is Thale Reed.
I did not know that.
Yes. Hannah Gutierrez Reed, daughter of Thale Reed.
Well.
And, all the respect in the world to him. And I'm kind of at that moment of, I think she knew what was right. I don't think she could. Sometimes people get persuaded, or starstruck, if you get my drift. Yeah.
Instead of calling them out, having the oomph to be able to call them out, because she's a young girl, like, well, I'm not going to call out all Alec Baldwin. I'll just let him get away with not listening to me.
I've only been in the business 8 months. Am I going to crack the whip and say, put the phone down now?
Right.
Yeah. think about how we would handle someone in class, not who has an emergency phone call or has a 5-second phone call, not someone who's waiting for their kids to get home from school and check in or something, but somebody who the whole day is like, yeah, whatever, I've got this. Would we not on a break have a little chat and say, look, I get that you might know all this, but you might, one thing, little thing, I think he couldn't be bothered.
Sad truth is, you're probably right.
And I think she was so new, and again, you've worked sets. If you were there and you were the armorer with these weapons, including period 1890 cowboy revolvers, would you be letting the crew go out and play with them on lunch breaks and after hours and plink cans with them?
That was one of the things that when I heard that, it really rubbed me the wrong way. You can't, again, you can't mix these things together.
But I want everyone to like me.
It just,
I don't want to have to be the disciplinarian.
If you're going to be the armorer, if you're going to be the person in charge of deadly weapons, then yes, you have to have the gumption, or whatever word you want to insert there, to do it. Or you need to go to the director and say, they are not listening to me. I can't take responsibility for this. You're going to have to either tell them to listen to me or I'm gone. Because at that point, you're taking liability on yourself. I mean, look, she's in a lawsuit now.
Well, she's not only in multiple lawsuits, but she's charged with involuntary manslaughter.
Yeah.
The civil side of her is a mess, but, the criminal charge. But to me, I'm wondering how much, again, she, as the armorer, as the safety officer, as whatever, you've sometimes got to play the role of the disciplinarian. You got to be the fun police sometimes.
Yeah.
Look, it's the same on the range. It's the same on the range. If Scott and I are on the range, we are two of the most laid back people in the world, except when it comes to safety. And we're not range Nazis or anything like that, for lack of a better term. We're going to calmly tell you what to do, unless you're doing something extremely unsafe, in which case we're going to do whatever we have to. We're going to calmly tell you what you're doing. But if it keeps up, even Scott, who's the most patient person I know, well, in most cases, he's going to kick him off the range. Yeah. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
And again, at some point, we have to be like that because there are some pretty significant consequences to oopses with this stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a possibility that the cinematographer may not go home. And as bad as that sounds, that's,
Well, I mean, here's an example. Scott, what are your safety protocols when we do, or I volunteer with him. So when you do simunition training, which if you're not familiar, simunition is just like, it's very similar to regular ammunition. You can use firearms that are very similar to real firearms. In fact, you can use real ones. But what is your safety protocols when you do simunition training?
Well, when we do simunitions with the police department, I have someone with me who's not new, and officers all the way up to the chief, when they walk in the door of whatever building we're training in, they are patted down and checked for weapons. They literally, no weapons, no ammo, nothing, not even taser, pepper spray, nothing live, no pocket knives, nothing live whatsoever. They're not even allowed in the building. And and I tell the people, whoever's helping me, and luckily the administration knows, like the higher ups aren't going to be offended by this. They're glad that when they walk in the door that somebody maybe lower ranked than them is stopping them and say, hey, I'm going to pat you down, because people forget. And I've had people at the door, hey, did you take everything off? Yeah, I took everything off. And they forgot about like another magazine or their backup weapon or something else. So that's why we pat them down. We check them because they're human. We're all human. It's not. So, I mean, they literally don't come in the building with anything live whatsoever.
Right. And now we did, when I teach the CWP, we have myself or another instructor at the door checking when people come in and, going through gun cases, magazines, everything, checking chambers and everything. No live ammunition permitted in the classroom. And we've got a few of the little plastic dummy rounds that we'll let them use in whatever caliber they've got. We've got an assortment there in a tray. But we've got Ziploc bags, and we'll have them unload all their mag and take it out to their car. No, you can't just put it in your purse.
Right.
No ammunition past this point. You go past that point with live ammunition, there's the door. I'm done.
Right.
And during
you
the
have to-
time, we'll walk around, and if we see a live round on the desk, it's a full stop and a recheck everybody.
Right. Because safety, you have redundancy is your friend when it comes to firearm safety.
If there's no live ammo in the classroom, it's impossible to have a discharge.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We come back from a break. Again, did anybody bring anything live back in? Again, these are entry-level CWP holders, so mostly they're not going to be carrying.
Right.
When we go to lunch or whatever, But no live ammunition past this point, for any reason whatsoever. You want to learn, we'll give you some of these. We'll learn how to chamber and clear and do and all and manipulate. And great, we'll do it with these. And I keep, again, like a plastic Plano tray, assorted sizes.
Mm-hmm.
From 22 to 45 up to 223. If we're dealing with AR stuff, I've got some in 223. No, these come past this point, nothing else.
Right.
Well, all my mags are loaded. Put your mags in the car. Well, I need a mag for the class. Okay, empty one into the Ziploc bag. I'm sorry. The consequences are too high of what we're doing. When we did live force on force up in North Carolina, it was everything had to be locked in your car.
Mm-hmm.
And they would check us before we went. We had a shoot house that we didn't shoot in, but for lack of a better term, again, checking everybody. And then at the same time, the instructor who checked everybody would then, the first thing he did in the class is stand up in the front and say, okay, I need someone to come up here and check me.
Yep.
And a lot of times he'd have something hidden on him. And if you missed it, you might work on your pat downs a little bit. Why? I had this knife in my crotch. And he'd pull out a little folding pocket knife. No, I said check me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was.
I went to a training class one time. It was great out in when I first started in Kansas, my law enforcement career. And we were talking about pat downs. And part of it was a practical pat down. And there was a man there and a woman there. And a lot of officers missed the fact that the woman had a not a full size, a 4-inch barrel 38 wedged between her breasts under her bra because most of the male officers didn't check there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot to be said for pat downs too.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, we always would check and check and check. And again, I talk about cleaning. Unload everything, clear everything out. Now stand up, take all the ammunition to another room, come back in. Before you sit down, make sure there's no ammunition anywhere. Now sit down and clean your gun.
Yeah.
But, and again, it's safety. And, it may sound to the folks like we're, safety Nazis, but
We have to be.
Well, as instructors, we have to be, number one. But even more so, if you get to the point that you do it without thinking about it, you develop that practice, it doesn't seem so Nazi-ish, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think most people appreciate it when they realize the objective.
Right. And it's like we talk about in our class. Okay, we're going to start with safety first, foremost, and every time.
I know we're probably getting close to the end, so this might be a good discussion for another day. But one thing on the range you have to have is humility. You can't have a big ego. Egos get people hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And, even Scott and I, he's been my best friend since like 20 years. And if I see him doing something, I'm going to tell him. And he has the grace that he'd probably, well, of course, he'd be embarrassed, first of all, because, if it was a safety thing, but he would say, yeah, thank you. And I would do the same for him. If he pointed out, you just flagged that person with your firearm, I'd say, man, thank you, because I want to know that. You can't have an ego. You can't get ticked off and that kind of thing.
Well, and again, the analogy I use with that one is very much similar to EMS. I'm a paramedic. I've been paramedicing for a long time. If my EMT partner, who's got 6 months on their card, sees me about to administer the wrong dose to a patient and potentially kill them because I've done the math wrong and I've multiplied, by the pounds instead of the kilograms, and I'm about to give some, pediatric patient a lethal dose, do I want them to tell me or do I want them to protect my ego?
Oh, yeah. You need to know.
Absolutely.
Oh, by the way, if it was your child, would you want them to tell me or would you want them to protect my ego?
Yeah.
Because again, we do checks and counter checks on dosing all the time. Would I want you to trust to remember the dosing, or if you're not sure, should you look it up? Is it 0.01 or 0.1 mLs per kg? No, be a professional. Don't look it up. That sounds real good in court.
Yeah.
But I have definitely enjoyed it, gentlemen. Anyone I know, Bill, you've got, think something you want to pimp out, don't you? Or
Actually, a couple things.
Okay.
Scott and I just started a podcast. It's actually a channel, not really podcast. It's the Dynamic Defense Academy channel. It's going to be on YouTube. It's nothing to see yet. We just recorded our first few videos the other day, and they're going to be edited soon. But look for the Dynamic Defense Academy channel on YouTube.
If I were you, I'd mirror it over to Rumble. Just saying.
Oh yeah, it'll be there.
You know where I'm at with that, because if you look at the numbers on this, we've got 2 on YouTube right now and 18 on Rumble.
Yeah. Oh, it'll definitely be on Rumble.
And we get so suppressed.
And there's a page already on Facebook. It's been there for a long time. Dynamic Defense Academy. You'll see Scott's daughter holding an AR-15, so you can tell that it's the right channel. And then the other thing I like to pimp out is Buffalo Bacon on YouTube, which we have several videos there. So search Buffalo Bacon. It is a great father-son team. My son and I have been making videos about the upstate of South Carolina, and we'd love to have subscribers there because we're slowly growing it organically.
And I know I've been catching some of your videos, and they're interesting. Even living here, there were some of the things you put up that I haven't even known about. And one of the ideas I had to suggest, I was going to mention to you for a video you did without me even suggesting, was something about GSP Airport.
Yeah, that one happened for fun. I got there I think I had 2.5 hours before my flight. So I actually went and took all the video before I went to wait on my flight. And then I took the intro video when I got back from my flight back to town, and my son put it all together, and looks real good. Yeah, that's a really cool video.
But to me, that was one of the things, because honestly, having flown out of a sort of different airports, I think GSP is one of the, my favorite ones to go through.
Yeah.
It really is.
Oh, I love it. Well, thank you for having us on, Mike. I really appreciate it.
It was a good time. Scott, it was good to meet you and get you all with us. May catch up with you sometime up there. I actually lived up in Simpsonville before I moved down here. I moved down here to Lawrence in 2004, but I actually lived up in Simpsonville prior to that.
Okay, yeah.
Lived right over across from Fire Station 2 in Spring Creek there.
I know right where that is.
And funny, well, we could talk about it after I sign this offline, because yeah, there were some interesting adventures there. We'll say that. But alrighty, folks. Well, we appreciate y'all coming by and checking us out. If you would, check out the rest of our video library. It's up on rumble.com. And as always, please hit the like button, share it out to your friends. We're trying to grow this channel, again, as organically as possible, and trying to provide information, entertainment, infotainment, whatever you call it. And yeah, don't yell at me too much for picking on Alec today. Like I said, I'm not doing it to be mean to him, but, you know, it's about the lady who died. And I'm going to go with that for, you know, my end roll on it. But I've enjoyed it, folks. Thank you much. Be safe.